Today we're doing lesson 1.5.1, part 1, rearranging literal equations. And our objective is students will be able to solve literal equations for the indicated variable. Let's start it out with our vocabulary terms. And today we have two terms. The first term is literal equation. A literal equation is an equation that involves two or more variables. So it would have x and y, or it could even have x, y, and z. It just has to have at least two variables or more. Our next term is one that you've heard before, and that's reciprocal. A reciprocal is a number that when multiplied by the original number has a product of 1. So for example, if the number is 3/4, reciprocal, you flip it over, so it's 4/3. If you multiply 3/4 times 4/3, we get 12 over 12, which is the same as 1. So after we multiply it, the product, or the answer to our multiplication, is 1. Let's go through how to rearrange literal equations. So you might be wondering, why does it matter how we do this? It's important because sometimes you are given an equation in standard form and you want it in slope-intercept form. So you have to know how to rearrange the terms and the variables. Or maybe sometimes it's in slope-intercept form and you want it in standard form. So that's just two different examples of when we would have one form and want another form. And we would have to use this process. So we are going to rearrange the equation 6y minus 12x equals 18. And we are going to rearrange this for y. That means that I want my y to be on one side of the equal sign and everything else to end up on the other side. So I actually just did the first step. The first step is to circle the variable that you are solving for, or the variable that you are trying to isolate. So I've circled my y. I need to move the coefficient of 6. And I also need to move the minus 12x over to the right side of the equation. So I'm going to move on to step number 2. And step 2 is to move the other terms by adding or subtracting. So when I say other terms, I mean the term that does not have the variable we are trying to isolate. So we're trying to isolate y. I want to move the term that doesn't have y, and that term is negative 12x, or minus 12x. So I ask myself, what is the inverse, or what is the opposite of minus 12x? Well, the opposite would be plus 12x. So I'm going to add 12x to both sides of the equation, just like you would add 12 to both sides if we were solving a regular linear equation. Now over here I made a note to only combine if like terms. So I can cross out negative 12x plus 12x because that simplifies to 0. And I still have 6y. I still have my equal sign. Now I have 18 plus 12x. Well, 18 is just a constant. 12x is a term that has a variable in it. And I can't combine those together because they are not like terms. So instead I'm going to write 18 plus 12x. Just write it out how we see it, except now it's side by side instead of 18 over the 12x. My third step is to multiply or divide to isolate the variable. So I'm trying to solve for y. That means I have this coefficient 6 that needs to go away. Since it's 6y, or 6 times y, I'm going to do the inverse, which is to divide. And over here I've made a note that I need to divide every term. So I'm not just going to divide the 6 and the 18, but I'm also going to divide 12x by 6 as well. So when I cancel out my 6's, I'm left with y equals 18 divided by 6 plus 12x divided by 6. The last and final thing I need to do is simplify. So I'm going to check out this equation that I have over here. I know that 18 divided by 6 can simplify, and that it simplifies to 3. And then I know that 12x divided by 6, I can reduce 12 over 6, which is 2, and I still have my x. Last thing I'm just going to do is switch that 2x and the positive 2x and the positive 3 because it's standard for us to put our variables before our constants. So there's one example. Let's just do a couple more together to help you get the hang of this. For the next example, we'll do 3x minus 2/3 y equals 15, and we are solving it for y. So my first step is to circle the variable I'm solving for. Next, I want to move the other terms, and when I say other terms, I mean the terms that do not contain that variable, so the terms that don't contain y. 3x does not contain y, so in order to cancel 3x, I have to do the inverse. I need to subtract 3x. And 3x minus 3x is 0. We still have negative 2/3 y equals 15 minus 3x. 15 and negative 3x are not like terms, so we can't combine them together. Now my next step is to multiply or divide to isolate the variables. Well, I'm solving for the y, so I have to move the negative 2/3. That would be dividing by negative 2/3, which is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So let's do times 3 over negative 2. And remember, we have to multiply everything by that negative 3 over negative 2, or negative 3 over 2. So every single term is being multiplied by the reciprocal. Over here it cancels out. So we are just left with y equals 15 times negative 3/2 minus 3x times negative 3/2. And when we simplify that, we get y equals negative 45 over 2 plus 9 over 2x. You could keep this like that, or you could simplify it further. So if you go the step further to simplify and divide these, that will give us negative 22.5 plus 4.5x. And you can rearrange that so that the x term comes before that constant. So really, any of these last three would all be correct answers. I'll do one more example. And this final example is 4y plus 3x equals 16. And we are going to solve for y. In all of these examples, we've solved for y, but you could solve for any variable. So start out by circling y. Now I need to move the term that does not contain that variable. So I'm going to take 3x, and I'll do minus 3x from each side. 3x minus 3x is 0. So we need to bring down the leftover. 4y equals 16 minus 3x. And last step is to multiply or divide so we can isolate that variable. So we divide every single term by 4. 4 divided by 4 cancels. And I'm left with y equals 16 over 4 minus 3 over 4x. Final step, we need to simplify this. 16 divided by 4 is 4. And we can't simplify this. If I put it in standard order, we will start with the negative 3/4 x. Notice that I kept that minus that was in front of 3/4 with 3/4. Since the 4 is positive, we're going to do plus 4. If you need to rewatch any of these examples, go ahead and don't forget your lesson assessment.